Hey yo, what's up?
Hi everyone, this is Soccer Shit, and for our first non-inaugural podcast, we are talking about the CONCACAF Champions League final between the Seattle Sounders and Pumas U.N.A.M. I'm Karun Sagar, and I'm
And
with
I'm Joe.
yeah, that was excellent. Well done. All right, so in the CONCACAF Champions League final, MLS side Seattle Sounders are going to try to be the first MLS team to win the CCL since 2000, and they'll face Pumas U.N.A.M. from Liga MX.
So this is going to be probably for one of the first times in a while, an MLS team is actually going to be favored currently to actually win in the final. I can't remember the last time where there was a favorite. Toronto might have been in 2018.
Were they not
I
heavy favorites in 2018?
I don't remember what the betting line or any talk of that was, but that basically, for all intents and purposes, in the current format of the Champions League here, there's only been 3 times that MLS has had a realistic chance of winning. One was in 2018, where it was Toronto versus Chivas, and they lost on penalty kicks, and that was the same run of Toronto FC where they won the Supporter Shield. They had a MLS Cup champion run in there as well, and they just narrowly lost on PKs in 2018. And then you had in 2020, it was LAFC versus I think it was Tigres, but
Yeah,
that was a weird year where, in theory, LAFC had the best run on paper of any MLS team because every single team that they beat came out of Liga MX. But halfway through the competition, they stopped doing two-leg and they just started doing it one. So, for example, I think it was Cruz Azul in the quarterfinals where
yeah,
everybody else played 2 games, but LAFC only had to beat them once on a neutral field. And then the semis and the final were only one-legged. So
yeah.
take that as you will, but they still did it. And a one-game final, anything can happen. So this is going to be, you have the team in the Seattle Sounders where historically they are amongst the
Best.
they're not a founding member obviously, but if you're talking about best run franchise or model franchise currently in MLS, if you don't have Seattle Sounders in there, I don't know what else to tell you here.
I mean,
um
historically speaking, it was DC United, and it's
LA Galaxy,
then it's
and
now it's Seattle Sounders.
right, and not trying to be rude, but DC United hasn't been exactly relevant for, or not consistently relevant, I should say. They've had on and off years. And then LA Galaxy hasn't had a dominating run since the mid 2000s.
They haven't been making the playoffs. So.
No. And you're talking about Seattle with a franchise that I don't think they finished worse than 7th in
Yeah,
any year. So if it's going to happen, man, this should be the year. And because the competition that they're playing with Pumas, obviously they come from Liga MX. Seattle historically doesn't do great on the road in Mexico, but if you take a look at this run, on paper, Seattle's actually done very well. It's basically been absolutely curb stomping everyone at home in Seattle, and then bending but not breaking on the road.
they haven't
Uh,
lost.
they have not.
They have
Um,
been the best team in this tournament so far, and it's not that close.
I would agree to that, but if you take a look at their road performances, while they have not lost, which is impressive in its own right, they let me put it this way: they haven't been convincing on the road. For example, in their match with Leon, um, They actually held the lead going into, I believe, the 80th minute, which on paper sounds good, but that I would say that was against the run of play. Just watching the game, I obviously, because of the first leg, they still would have deserved to go on, but they weren't exactly threatening consistently the goal. They just had one or two chances. They took advantage of one of them to score the one road goal. And then we had their semifinal versus New York FC, or New York City, excuse me. And that was an insane game that could have ended like 7-4 if everyone put away their chances. So they deserve to be where they are, but
the scoreline's flattering them.
Yes, the scoreline is flattering, but the home performance, that is absolutely what it should be. In fact, some of their games, it should have been even worse for the opposition in Seattle. They have been on fire this competition while playing at home.
I think for some historical context to how their teams are like this position, usually there is no MLS team in the final. And going just back history, the most successful countries in the CONCACAF Champions League go Mexico at more than like 20 something, Costa Rica at 6. Then you have El Salvador and Honduras, and then you have the US, who has 2 championships, which were both hosted at home, I believe. They were hosted in the US with LA Galaxy and DC United, and we have never won since. The closest we've come since then was probably 2018, where Toronto basically beat the best teams in Liga MX. The New York Red Bulls were destroying the second tier teams in Liga MX, and then they came in against just Chivas team that was near the bottom of the table. They were pretty clear favorites. They sort of ran the run of play, but Chivas was able to basically shithouse a couple wins. And it didn't help that Toronto had an injury crisis the night before the final.
And in terms of the competition this year with Pumas, excuse me, they, on paper, I mean, if you just go up and down their roster, Seattle's is better. There hasn't been a lot of times where you've been able to say that. You usually it's been, oh no, whatever, MLS team X should be able to put up a fight against Liga MX team Y. But I mean, if you go up and down the roster, Seattle just has a better team.
They've also just been better over the last couple of years, even in international competition.
I mean, Pumas hasn't been great. For those of you listening that are unfamiliar with how the Liga MX season works, they technically have 2 different. They play basically the same amount of games as like MLS or like any other league does, but they split it into 2 seasons. It's an opening and then a closing. And the way that Pumas got there is that I believe they won the closing in 2021, and that's how they were able to qualify for this one. Let me double check that. Oh, they were the runners up in 2020. So that's how they were able to qualify here. But then in the other half of the season, they were mid-table at best. And currently, I think they're like 9th in Liga MX table.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle isn't that much better.
Well,
that much better in MLS.
I will say this, in fairness to both those teams, they are very, like, for example, Seattle played yesterday with a completely turned over roster because of the champion. Like, both teams have very clearly probably, I can't speak for Pumas, but I know Seattle for sure has prioritized this Champions run over the start of the MLS season. That has been very obvious just by looking at how their rotation of their squad has been.
Yeah.
But even excluding this year, Pumas they aren't Club America, they aren't Tigres, they aren't they aren't Monterrey, they aren't Atlas, they aren't even Cruz Azul, who is their main rival. but they aren't an historically strong franchise. They're not bad.
Also, some
But
interesting history here. The last time a Mexican team lost in the CONCACAF Champions League was when Pumas made the final. They lost to Saprissa, who then finished third in the Club World Cup, which was like the first time that had ever happened. Just throwing that out there.
yeah, so looking back, like we covered that 2020 and 2018 were the other times. Do you think this is a better chance than those two, or are we still looking at 18 just because of how on paper Toronto was doing at that time? Like at that point, Toronto was the best team in MLS, arguably history,
Yeah.
with the run that they were doing, but they also had a stronger on paper opponent where
Did they?
this I think so. Um I remember going back looking back at because I remember watching that final. They played evenly. It was
They
they
played evenly, but it's worth
yes.
noting that Toronto was like missing a lot of their starting 11. And in the semifinals, playing against another historically great team, the New York Red Bulls, the Jaguars was completely. They were like it was an even game away, and they just sat back and just about scraped through the home leg, where the New York just peppered them as chances.
Right. Which
So
sounds very familiar to this season with Pumas, where they really shouldn't even be where they are, as if Bruce Arena doesn't have an absolute failure of a game plan in the second
not to
leg.
mention like the best player in MLS not being available.
Right. But even then, they went into the second leg with a 3-0 cushion.
Yeah.
Bruce Arena pre-game goes, they have to score, we don't, which is asking for trouble. And wouldn't you know it, they come back and
You score one goal, that's a five.
right.
What is the
I don't know.
I
But
mean, New England were missing their starting center backs, and Matt Turner, who by G plus, which is for people who don't know, is a metric which basically uses position on the field to evaluate how a player contributes to winning. Generally speaking, um, he is far and away been the leader in MLS in that for like a couple years. He was an MVP. He was basically the MVP of the Gold Cup team, where the USC team won the regional trophy for CONCACAF. Matt Turner was missing. The center backs were missing, and it was kind of obvious, and it's been obvious all season. New England are missing those players. But all that being said, they still should have won that. I mean, for more historical context, no MLS team that has gone 2 goals up in the home leg since the recent format was established, no team that has gone 2 goals up has failed to close the deal. Like if an MLS team wins 2 goals at home, up until New England's choke job, they would win, they would progress and advance to the next round. That is what the historical precedent was, and Booth Arena brilliantly just chucked that away.
right. I will give to give some credit to Pumas here. I would say that they had a pretty good semifinal run. They beat Cruz Azul, and in the second leg, they actually got Pumas actually received a red card in the 60th minute,
Yeah.
and they still kept that a 0-0 draw, which that was the away tie. So that's not nothing. So
Yeah.
at the very least, we've seen them hang on with 10 men and then come back from a 3-0 deficit. I would say to definitely not overlook them. But
Yeah.
like for example, if you look at transfer market value, which is not the end all be all, but if you just take a quick casual look at that, the top player out of either team comes out of Seattle. That is Raul Ruidiaz. That's approximately 8 million. And then for Pumas, it's Juan Deneno, who has, for all intents and purposes, I think he scored 7 goals so far in the Champions League, which he's obviously their most potent striker. That's more than Montero and Morris combined for Seattle. So if you don't shut him down, that might be the difference in this game. But then if you go down the rest of Seattle's lineup, in terms of the competition that we're comparing here, you then have Christian and Alex Rodon, you have Jordan Morris, you have Nuhu from Cameroon, you got Joao Paulo, you got I already said Alex Rodon, but like you just have multiple good players coming off from Seattle. Like Seattle is arguably the best team on paper in MLS. And the only reason why they aren't doing better, as we alluded to, is because they're prioritizing another competition.
Yep.
As opposed to the start to MLS.
This might be the best constructed roster in MLS history. Like they basically pulled the best player from the Real Salt Lake shithoused them to beat them without a shot. Then they went and they took the best player from Real Salt Lake and signed him as a free agent. So that's one very good player who's like near the MVP level. You have Raul Ruiz. That's not how you say his name, but that is a second player who can play like an MVP for a season. You have Nicolas Loidero, who can also play like an MVP for a season. You have Roldan, who has absolutely been dominant against Liga MX opposition for the last 2 years. And then you have Nuhu, who just basically shut down Algeria to make the World Cup. This is a really loaded team, even in terms of CONCACAF.
Yeah, and don't forget Freddie Montero, who came back for Seattle. Or granted, he's 34. He isn't the star player that he was 10 years ago.
Yeah,
but he's still their main.
He was scoring goals
he's
against
still
Santos
scoring.
Laguna in the Champions League a few years back.
And then Stephen Fry, their keeper, he's gone
a good
again.
keeper.
Yep, he's had a resurgence. He had a very good game in both the quarters and the semis. He at bare minimum, he's kept at probably 4 goals from scoring in both of those sets of ties. So he's in form. The midfield is in form.
Don't forget Jordan Morris, who's
he just scored a banger.
Jordan Morris before his ACL was a really, really one of the best players in MLS.
And he still has a straight line speed, and he still has a good shot. He can't really pivot. He can't go side to side anymore. But if you just put him in a one-on-one foot race, he's probably faster than anybody that you're going to put against him. And if you give him time and space to take an open shot, he's probably going to place it. He's also has a pretty deft touch for assists as well, as we saw against New York City as well.
Yeah. I mean, just to put this in like using transfer market, which again isn't the end all be all, but it's used by actual teams and it's fairly predictive, meaning they can predict how leagues are going to end up in terms of the table and standings. Pumas is at an average transfer market value of 1.40 million for each player. Santos Laguna 2.34, Azul 3.06, New York City FC 2.16, New England Evolution, who they beat 1.85, and Seattle 1.96. Point I'm making here is on paper, this team really isn't as good as many of the teams in this competition. And adding the fact that Seattle have just probably been the better team throughout this tournament and probably just been better in general internationally as of late. If this was not MLS versus Liga MX, if we just looked at these teams in a vacuum and we just did not care about like any sort of league history, I think everyone would agree that Seattle, like basically everyone would agree Seattle are the favorites here.
I think the only, or I would say one of the biggest factors historically holding back Seattle in terms of whether or not they should be considered the favorites is that historically Seattle has been terrible away
from
to
home.
Mexico away to Mexico.
That's
They
true.
up until this current Champions League, they usually lost by 2 to 3 goals
Every game.
and every time they went, and it wasn't unlucky. It was they were 100% outplayed, outmatched, out hustled, out everything,
Yeah.
and they would just completely blow it every time in the second leg usually. But this time, even when they let up a goal against Lyon, again, they weren't the better team away at that match, but at worst, that was a 1-goal loss, which is good enough.
Yeah.
If you tell me this first game against Pumas and it's only a 1-0 loss, and then the second tie is going back to Seattle, which, by the way, they earned because the way whoever gets the second leg in the final is whoever had the more impressive performance over the course of the
Points,
entire
goal
tournament. Yes,
differential. Yeah.
and Seattle did better as points total accumulated than Pumas did. So that's why they had the second leg. And they're going into the second leg where I don't think they failed to score less than 3 goals the entire this has
I
been
mean, New England scored 3 goals. So just don't lose by 3.
but they just need to do that last as opposed to first and hang on this time.
Yeah.
In theory.
Yeah. But this is a podcast which will cover both teams, so we should probably talk more about Pumas and who they have, their players, etc.
Right. So, fun fact: we actually have a U.S. possible national on there, and Sebastian Saucedo as a left winger.
Huh.
Yeah. So he's not necessarily a first-rank starter for them, but he does play for them. I do believe he was playing against the Revolution when they were able to pull off that upset with a 3-0. So he was involved in that. They also, as I touched on before, U.N.A.M, he is their main scoring threat. He has 7 goals so far in the Champions League. So it's probably everything's going to go through him. They do have a pretty good defensive line. Like if you look at the transfer market values in terms of, again, not the end all be all, but in terms of rating the players, after Deneno, who is their top rated player at about 5 million transfer fee, their next 3 players are right back, center back, and center back with Alan Mozo, Nicolas Ferre, and Arturo Ortiz. So, and then their left back is the 6th highest on that list, with Rodriguez. So they have it, which is about right. This is a team that they're not going to outplay you with talent. They're not going to win with the razzle dazzle. They are going to grind you down and win a lot like the U.S. men's national teams of old, where they won with grit, determination, hustle, and they're just going to outwill you at the end of the day. They also
seem similar to the opponents we're going to be playing at the World Cup. They have one striker who's scored twice as much as everyone else in the competition, and then they have an elite back line, and then they just absorb pressure, hit you on the break.
Yeah, and probably the best team other than Seattle remaining in the competition, in the semifinals, is probably Cruz Azul out of Liga MX as well, and they beat them. I think Cruz Azul was the highest ranked team coming into the competition, period.
Yes.
And Pumas was the one that eliminated them.
They also beat New England, who had just broken the MLS points record, albeit not nearly at the same level. Strength,
but still, I can't fully take that away from them.
They also they also overcame a 4-goal deficit against Cruz Azul in another competition.
Yeah, this is a team that has historically basically defied the odds and has come back multiple times. And in terms of their form this season, they're 7th in the table in Liga MX, which doesn't sound that impressive, but that's only 3 points out of 4th. Yeah. So basically 1 game and they're in the top 4, and they're probably not going to get into the top 2. So if they this is going to be their chance. Like, for example, Seattle will always have a good chance of getting winning the Western Conference or winning the MLS Cup or winning something, because consistently they're one of the top teams every single year. This is Pumas' chance to shine. They aren't going to get a chance next year to do this.
Yeah.
Unless they come up with, because the first half of the season, it was Atlas and Club America. So that was already taken. And the top two spots is Pachuca and Tigres are well ahead of anybody that's going to beat them in terms of this closing season. So this is Pumas's chance to get to the Club World Cup.
Yeah. It's also worth noting that Seattle like transition a lot. They like to sit back, absorb pressure, especially in these games against Liga MX teams, as we've seen in the Champions Cup and the Champions League. They like to sit back, take pressure, and then hit you on the counter. I don't know how effective that will be against this team that also likes to do that.
Right. I think this game is going to be played at Mexico City in terms of the first leg. That's where Pumas is located, is Mexico City. This is going to be as wild as an environment as Seattle is going to have to play, even against Leon. So I don't think they're going to try. I would have to imagine that they're not going to try to control the possession battle in this first leg. What could possibly happen here is they are too conservative, and instead of trying to get at least one away goal, which unlike other leagues, that is actually still being used. The first tiebreaker, if the goal differential is even, is away goals. That's the first tiebreak. MLS and CONCACAF, for whatever reason, did not get rid of it like over in Europe. They aren't using it really anymore over there. But if they try to just get out of there with a 0-0 draw as opposed to maybe a 1-1 draw, which is substantially better,
yeah,
that could lead to a big problem. But granted, they didn't do that in their other league that they had. That was the best showing that Seattle has ever had in Mexico, period, bar none.
I don't know about that.
And I should say that was one of their better results, and they did what they had to do. But
they almost knocked. That was one time when the LA Galaxy and the Seattle Sounders played in Liga MX, and I believe Seattle ended up losing in away goals in the semifinals to the eventual champs. But we get the point. Yeah, right. They're not.
Right. Historically, that is the exception and not the norm. But it looks like this year they figured it out.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, cross your fingers. We still have one more game here to play. So the first game of the final here is going to still take place in April. That's going to take place on April 27th. And then the second leg is going to be played on May 4th. So pretty much just right around the corner. Both teams seem to be in good health as of right now. Like I mentioned yesterday's game, Seattle did basically not a full rotation of everybody, but the Roldans weren't starting. Montero, I don't think, started, if I remember correctly. So they're clearly saving their horses here.
Pumas is missing. Well, right now, Marco Garcia is out. I don't know if he's a starter, but
I don't think that he is. Granted, I can't tell you that I've watched a ton of their coverage, but I think he's more of a depth piece than a full-on starter. So all things considered, cross your fingers, in 2 weeks, both teams should have a pretty good chance here and pretty healthy here as well. So
yeah,
who do you think, are we going to say that this is Seattle's time, or are we saying that they're going to blow it again in Mexico?
It feels like I'm setting myself up for disappointment, but if we just didn't think about the fact that Seattle are an MLS team and Pumas are a Liga MX team, we would be picking Seattle, right? Like,
No, I agree.
so I mean, I'm not saying that history is irrelevant, but at the same time, like, if you just look at these teams in a vacuum, Seattle have played better, generally speaking. They have more talent, more international pedigree. They probably have more tournament experience at this level. They've been good internationally over the last 2 seasons. And yeah, you'd favor Seattle here. It also probably helps them that the first leg is going to be away from home, where Pumas will have they'll be the one expected to come in and do something. I think it's essential that they get something away. I think if they lose 1 goal, the series flips to like a toss-up or Pumas winning. Because at least that's what it feels like to me, because in the New York Red Bulls Chivas game in 2018, which could have set up an all-MLS final, it essentially came down to a 1-0. They had a 1-0 advantage, and because both teams were set up to like play in transition, when the game states allowed Chivas to just completely shut everything off, that ended up dictating the game. All that said, Seattle are probably the better team, so they should probably win, even if Pumas have been killing Giants. Hopefully this is where the Cinderella story stops.
Do you got any score predictions?
No.
For both?
No. I'm not brave
enough to predict those, just hoping for the winner?
Yeah, I'd rather just I guess maybe Seattle get like a 1-1 draw, and then they win like 1-0.
That's pretty much what I think. I agree with you. I think it's going to be a 1-1 draw in Mexico City, and then I think Seattle's going to take it in the second leg. They've just been unstoppable at home. Even if they lose the first game, it's not like they've scored more goals against better competition at home.
Fair.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Yep. So I think this is Seattle's, and more importantly, MLS's time. I think they're finally going to do it.
All right. So there's a segment I wanted to start the podcast with, but I'll just edit it around for this. What do we think what would Seattle, let's say Seattle won this, what would this represent? And I think there's 3 ways we can think about this. There's symbolically what it symbolizes, descriptively what it tells us about the leagues, and and 3, practically, like what benefits or what would the consequences be? Like what would be incurred by the ability to win this and go to the Club World Cup?
That's a really good question. I think the point I would want to talk on more in terms of that would be more importantly, the relationship between how MLS is viewed with Liga MX, and then how MLS is just viewed, period, moreover than in just country. Because if Seattle does win, let's just say that they do, yes, that is big for Seattle. They get to forever hold that on their banner that they were the first team in this iteration, I should
just
say.
For like some historical. DC United basically won the Sudamericana, and they won the Champions Cup, and that sets them in their own place. LA Galaxy won the Champions Cup. If we see DC United and LA Galaxy as the first flag bearers for the league, winning this puts Seattle in the pantheon. It basically it cements them as
it's a big three as opposed to a big two. Without, I don't think there's going to be any question at that point.
Yeah.
You're talking about a team that's, I don't even, the club is what, 12 years old? Didn't they?
Yeah, 12 years old. They've
in
won
2009, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and they've never missed the playoffs.
No, and they haven't even been worse than like seventh. They've never had a bad year. They consistently been a threat. But in terms of what it would mean for MLS, what is the first club that MLS is compared to? Obviously, it's the league directly south, Liga MX. I don't think anybody would say that MLS is a better league than Liga MX at this time.
No.
Obviously, MLS, let's be fair here, it's not even 30 years old yet, or it's about there. It is one of the newest. I don't even know if there's a really big league that's come out since MLS has.
Canadian Premier League, sure.
Fair enough. But in, this short amount of time, they have closed it's not closed, but they've made up a lot of ground.
And I think it's worth pointing out. So if we had tackled the descriptive part of my question, it's worth noting that Seattle can lose this game. It would not change the fact that over this tournament, MLS has been very competitive with Liga MX directly in terms of H2H. And it wouldn't change that the percentage of wins has improved drastically over the last 10 years.
Yes. I mean, you're talking since 2018, you're talking 3 different times where the MLS team has had a legitimate chance.
Yeah. And in 2018, it's like that was basically when TAM, which is it is a mechanism in which MLS teams are allowed to have better depth, essentially. So TAM comes in 2018, MLS just straight up outdoes, head to head, directly speaking, they outdo Liga MX. Then in the next 2 seasons, Liga MX kind of comes back. And then here you have MLS going that way. And I think it's worth pointing out that Liga MX has not been a static thing. Liga MX has improved by all discernible metrics. You can look at transfer market, international representation, league rankers. Over the last 5 years, basically, Liga MX has become a top 10 league. They used to not do that well in the Copa Lib. The last 2 years they were in the finals. They made the final. Then they finished 3rd in the Club World Cup. Then they finished 2nd in the Club World Cup. And the parity is improved. The depth's improved. They get more representation internationally. Liga MX has been improving. So MLS being able to just make that more even is a sign of progress, regardless of how this final ends in the descriptive sense. And I think it's important that we don't just, because, whoever wins this is going to be a bunch of hot takes, but this is just a 2-legged tie. And these are basically 8 teams, 9 teams from 2 leagues that have lots of teams. This sample should not be overreacted to. It's nice to be the team that wins, but descriptively speaking, I don't think it's a world of difference if the Liga MX team wins or the MLS team wins.
I would agree with that. I want to add 2 quick things to that. The first one being, let's just say Seattle does win. An added perk of that is you get all that free advertisement of, one, we have the World Cup year this year.
Yes.
And then you get to say, come look at obviously the first billing is going to be the United States national team going into there. But then you get to say, hey, look at our domestic product, which is horribly cast aside on its current ESPN platform. but there's another entire other story.
I mean,
But
Liga MX is more popular.
right,
in the
but this is going to be the more important thing. If Seattle wins, is you get 100% free advertisement to go, hey, come look at the U.S. men's national team, but also look at your domestic product playing in a very important club World Cup that's making all the money and has all the
And
eyes on the
Jordan
product.
Morris could be at both the World Cup and the
Yes,
Club Cup.
and Roldan Christian Roldan honestly could be too if
Yeah.
he has a chance to be. So you can take players that are going to the World Cup and then showing them to your domestic product. That
So
could be.
so this will shift into the practical angle of this. How beneficial would winning this be? Like, is this a seismic change? Do European teams start looking at our prospects more seriously?
I would say that it starts a process. It doesn't go from A to Z with a snap of your fingers, obviously, because we're talking about it'd be the first time you get to say it's a small sample size.
Yeah.
Obviously, the next step, but it's going to at least, hey, they've actually done it. Can the eyes are going to be, can you then continue it? And even that doesn't mean that MLS has to win the next 3 CONCACAF Champions League titles. That's not what we're saying here. But what is going to be the expectation is going to be, can they provide a legitimate
basically, can they be like 50-50 or 40-60?
Exactly.
Oh, the next
can you take it, at bare minimum 2 teams with the expectations of winning it without praying and holding on for dear life and hoping luck is on your side?
If we switch to the descriptive side of this, if MLS, like for the next 3 seasons, is able to go 50-50 with Liga MX, just based on how the leagues are set up, MLS has a thing called parity, and it's just unrivaled in that department, which means its best teams are disproportionately weaker than the best teams of other leagues. If MLS was to go 50-50 over the next 3 seasons, would we be like, yeah, okay, MLS is better?
That would be the argument, but depending on who you talk to and who did they beat in order to get there. Like, for example, this year we beat, let's just say if Seattle wins, they beat Leon and they beat Pumas. Not exactly historical powerhouses. In those 50-50s, if they beat Tigres and Monterrey and Club America, if they beat them, then that's, you're starting to eliminate the argument that they only beat mid-tier Liga MX tables as opposed to
It's also worth saying this might be a down year for Liga MX, if for nothing else, because they just had a massive scandal. So at the Atlas Queretano game, I didn't pronounce that correctly, but there was violence, and that sort of dominated discourse in Liga MX. There's also been things where they closed off relegation for a season. Some of the traditional big boys have had down years. And MLS has fielded a very strong thing. You had a record-breaking points team, New England. You had NYCFC, who've had the most points over the last 5 years. And then you have Seattle Sounders, who are Seattle Sounders. So I think just this year you can say, hey, it's a sample size, blah, 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 blah.
Right. And actually, if you look at the tables for Liga MX, Club America is already going to be in next year's CONCACAF Champions League because they won the opening half of their season. And Tigres I would be shocked if they dropped it. They're currently 6 points up on the qualification spot. So there you go. There's your chance. If you are able to go through those 2 teams, you are starting to eliminate a whole bunch of excuse making, and you're kind of just left with basically you're only left with is MLS is expected to compete every single year. Granted, they may not win. That shouldn't be the expectation anyway. But there shouldn't be the expectation of whenever they go up to against any of these Liga MX sides, it's a 50-50 or a very close game. It shouldn't. We're starting, even as you said, even if Seattle loses, you've seen the wheels turning of the narrative that it's Liga MX and everybody else.
I do wonder how quickly this shifts, because in 2018, MLS was better over the course of the tournament. But then Mexico just went on a spending spree, basically. And is this just a matter of finances? Is it that one league ups the ante and then the other league? Because before this tournament, which has been like the second or most successful for MLS here, you had Toronto signing Insigne, you had an expansion team, which was expected to finish at the bottom, signing the best player in the Danish league. You had Shaqiri, you had a bunch of players who just you would not expect in that prime entering.
Shaqiri shocked, by the way. Sorry to interrupt you, but Shaqiri, that came out of nowhere for me. That was one of the most shocking purchases I've ever seen.
Yeah,
for MLS.
Yeah, you had the South American Player of the Year joining. Is this just a matter of, okay, MLS upped the money and now Liga MX is going to up the money and that's just going to yo-yo?
Well, I'm going to whether or not this is truly a pushback, it's going to have to remain to be seen. But you'll notice that those were exports that MLS brought in when they threw around their money. Liga MX throws around money to keep domestic players in their league. They don't go out shopping to a lot of European clubs or South American clubs.
That's been the issue with the national team.
Yeah, for good reason. You're trying to market with Mexico. They try to market Liga MX with the national team. MLS does it not. Depending on who you talk to, people will complain that they do it too much, but it's not even remotely close to the same thing. So MLS is bringing in some pretty big market names, as you just alluded to, while Liga MX will spend money, but they're bringing in more domestic product, which not to say that they're not bringing in solid players when they do that, but you are limiting the player pool that you can market. Now, I don't know how incentivized Liga MX is going to be to spend outside of a domestic product. If let's just say that let's just say they lose 3 Champions Leagues in a row and MLS wins all 3 of them. Does that force a change, or are they too rooted in their ways? I mean, we would have to wait and see, but
yeah. I think that's where the winning the final might have consequences here, because if it's just the middle and bottom of MLS closes the gap or gets stronger, but the top teams keep losing the Champions League final, you don't necessarily need to worry about that if you're the Liga MX. So you're like, hey, look, we keep winning the Champions League. But if you win the final over and over again, then I think there might be some demand from the clubs themselves, from like the club supporters, to start engaging in the market more.
Yeah, it's not unlike what you see with the national teams, where the US last 4 times, they're 3 wins and a draw, no losses. That doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon with the current structures of the national teams. But you also haven't seen a drastic change yet. Even with this in terms of what the U.S. national team and Mexico national teams this last year and a half, it's been terrible for Mexico. Yet this still wasn't enough for a dramatic overhaul. So maybe they haven't reached a tilting point on that.
I mean, the team outside of losing to us 4 times though has basically done what they usually do at this point in the cycle.
Right, but when usually there's action taken when there's a game of consequence that they'd lose to the U.S. Like Tata Martino would have been fired probably if he lost to the U.S. at the Azteca. I think any Mexico coach would have been fired if they lost to the U.S. team at the Azteca. But even though it was an underwhelming, he still got them there because their whatever line that they set for Tata.
That line has changed, I feel, for both teams, I think.
Yeah.
I remember Bob Valley got fired. The justification was, well, he lost in the final to Mexico. And
There
Mexico,
is a little bit more. There is more to that than just that.
There is. I mean, the real reason was Klinsmann came in to change the fundamental system, but that gave them the. If you win that final, then I don't know that Bob Valley would justify. Could be just him being fired would be justifiable.
That would be the best run of any head coach, arguably, that we've ever had. Even better than that would have been the best 4-year run period we've ever had.
Yeah.
If he had won that, arguably. But yeah, I think those are very similar situations here. Basically, the national team got a head start, but now we're seeing it with the club teams where there hasn't been even with the Canadian MLS teams, they weren't overwhelmed either while playing throughout this tournament. There was,
Canadian teams have actually, on average, outperformed American teams in this
right.
tournament.
But that's kind of my point. Both regions, both Canada and the U.S., there hasn't been an overwhelming loss by MLS. The only one you can say that maybe the Revolutions won, but that was only disappointing because they won 3-0 in the first leg, and then the best team of the tournament has been an MLS team. That hasn't been that way since 2018. Yeah, basically. But you also had the Revs that could have done that if they were at full strength, or at the very least had Turner. I mean, they don't lose 3-0 with Matt Turner in that second leg. It's possible that it happens, but it's substantially less likely.
Yeah.
So we could be talking about. Well, actually, they would have played each other. We could be talking completely like an MLS versus MLS final. That's going. I think I actually just touched it.
Montreal Cruz Azul was also pretty close.
Yes, it absolutely was. But I think might be where the tipping point is to what causes Mexico to, or like the entire Mexico Federation and the club system to change, is if it can become, like historically, it's been Mexico team versus Mexico team A versus Mexico team B in the final.
Yeah.
What if it's MLS team A versus MLS team B in the final? There's not even Mexico there. That, I think, is that's going to be that top goal right there.
If that doesn't form a chain, nothing
would.
It's worth asking how much of a change is possible here. Like, what is the actual capacity because MLS teams may not be the best competitively speaking, but they are extremely valuable franchises. And the UF is just an economic powerhouse, which Mexico necessarily isn't. And we've seen that Mexico will have friendlies in the US. They will, the whole discussion about the League's Cup being hosted in the US is basically because the US is financially more lucrative. This is a thing where like there's a ceiling and there's a limit to how Mexico can compete here.
I think the problem of the limit if we're talking about a limit, I think the problem is with MLS and not Liga MX. Because with MLS I should say currently, in terms of how it's structured, there are only certain ways that teams can structure their roster. It is one of the biggest problems is you can have an amazing starting 11, but then because of the spending restrictions that MLS has in place, your bench is usually awful.
Yeah.
That's one of the sticking points there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Liga MX doesn't have that problem. If they just decided to just say, okay, screw it, we're taking the training wheels off, we're going to start not just using domestic players, we're going to start poaching players from Europe and just pay them top dollar, whatever the fan base thinks, we just need to get results. Liga MX has an advantage over that if they decide to do
Would players find Mexico more attractive than the US as a destination?
if the dollar amount's right.
But this is all, so theoretically MLS could just get rid of the salary cap. I mean, we've just seen it, they've been loosening the restrictions a little bit.
Basically, it's what would happen first. Would MLS restructure its salary restraints, or is Liga MX going to open up beyond its borders?
Yeah.
Basically the chicken or the egg here. That would be the difference in terms of flip-flopping, because if things keep going the way that they are at the current trajectory, while on paper Liga MX will probably still be a quote-unquote better league, but as opposed to, I think in like, again, take these rating systems for what you will, but in like global football rankings, which is derived from 538's club,
it's a combination of transfer market and
yes, I believe
538.
Liga MX is 9th or 10th on that list, and MLS is
It goes from 14 to 16.
Yes, or something like mid-teens. So at bare minimum 5 spots off. If the current trajectory continues as is, MLS is going to drop that gap to where you get to say that Liga MX is better, but you're talking more a coin flip in terms of head-to-head.
The thing is, if we're using that fight, what they do, which is why their rankings are different than almost everyone, is they basically look at every team and try to give every team a rating. And so we're talking about starting 11s in depth. It's conventional wisdom that the depth is what really matters. That might only be true for the best teams. Because if you just look in, I don't know, the Premier League, if you're not the big six, most of the teams are just riding and dying with their starting 11.
That's true. But as you alluded to, MLS has a lot of parity.
Yeah.
So, and because like any 1 year, a team one player could be enough for like a 5-win difference any year, depending on how other things.
And it's just the starting 11 plays more than just backups do. So it's quite possible at the top level, okay, Liga MX is like this. But what if you had, I don't know, the bottom MLS teams play the bottom Liga MX teams? What would happen?
I think the worst of MLS is worse than Liga MX, but I don't know if that's the important narrative. I wonder if it's can Seattle, New England Revolution, and LAFC compete with Club America, Tigres, and
it might not be the more important narrative, but practically speaking, if you're looking at this from the national team programs, if the mean of this league just catches up to the mean of that league, then when I have all my domestic players here, I'm not actually losing out on anything, theoretically speaking, if that makes sense. Like you're playing the same level of competition.
I think in that sense, it's in terms of, let's just say you want to try to bring in more players. I think it's basically what is the most attractive contract that's offering, and then players are actually going to take a look at the structure of the franchise.
The other thing they will look at though is exports, because the MLS model has now been we're selling league. You send young player, we sell him to Europe. When you're choosing a league to sign, if you're young and you have potential, for the most part, you don't want to spend your whole career in the league you're joining.
Yes. This is also going to help dispel the tired notion of MLS being the retirement league, where the Bundesliga and the premier 35-year-old players basically go to have their last little joyride and then they retire.
I feel like that's kind of been dead for a bit.
That's kind of the thing. Yes, to anybody that pays attention, yes, that it has, but to more casual people, I don't know how dispelled that truly is. If we're beating Liga MX teams regularly, were a constant threat. That's just going to naturally eliminate that completely. And we're going to be talking about bringing up, basically, as you just said, we're going to be a youth environment. We're going to be, this is where people come to show your talent and move on to a bigger stage, which that might not, that's in the best interest of the league. Obviously, fan bases that could, depending on who you talk to, that could be frustrating, because then every so many years your roster might turn over because everyone's going to be going every which way other than your current league. But you're going to have a bunch of good, talented players coming in year out, and it's going to bring a lot of money to you guys.
Yeah.
So as long as you can convince the fan base that, hey, maybe you're not going to have, your 5 to 10 year veterans as much as anymore, but you still will. It's not like, let's just say a Christian Roldan, who could he go somewhere other than MLS? Absolutely, if he wanted to. He's better. He could go to somewhere in Europe and play.
He would be one of the best players in Liga MX. At least
exactly.
If you go bias.
Yes, but you're still going to have, I'll call them lifetimers, or not that that's their quality of play necessarily. That's just where they want to be. You're still going to have that. That's not going to just go away. It's just you're just not going to have somebody, a homegrown product, go from point A and go all the way to Z with you. They just might go somewhere else. But you're still going to hold on to, like the majority of domestic players in MLS or Liga MX or, like the Scottish Premier League, wherever have you, their talent level represents that domestic league usually.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason for that. You're just going to have those very talented individuals probably go somewhere else, but it's not like you're going to have a massive drop in quality. You just might not have as many shining examples of talent.
Yeah, I think it's really about depth at this point when you're just comparing domestic leagues. It's about depth and the ability to sell prospects as far as the national team is concerned. I think it's also worth considering that MLS and Liga MX don't necessarily function, they don't have the same objectives. MLS in large part it sort of supports the national team. Liga MX is, they are not as tied to the market or the positive national team. They're just there to sort of just make money and do well competitively.
Right. I really think that I do think that we're going to see, this might be a diverging point here, basically a branch where we might see that change if MLS starts taking over here. We're going to see what the priorities of each of these leagues are when you're seeing your highest competition come up and start taking this. Basically, how are the leagues going to respond to the other league taking away possible revenue from the other?
Yeah,
we're going to see how that turns out here pretty soon, I think.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting Mexico's talent base is still insane. They have more soccer playing than almost any place in the world. They dominate youth things.
They might have the best youth development. They have a top 3 in the world, period.
Their system is just how they just do at every stage. And so many people have put these and put, why is Mexico not one of the elite of soccer too? Well, the league doesn't sell talent. The league doesn't develop talent facilities, blah, 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 stuff like that. Maybe this is the thing that wakes up the sleeping giant that is Mexican soccer.
That is true, but we're talking about 50 years of this happening, and they still haven't done it.
Can you come closer to the...
Can you hear me? Sorry about that.
To the mic, yeah.
Okay. We're talking 50 years of that happening currently, and it still hasn't happened yet. I mean, so like if it hasn't happened by now, I don't know if this one event is going to automatically change that. I mean, it could.
I mean, not one like just because we're noting for the last 50 years, they've had no competition. The league has had just no competition whatsoever. But now they might have actual competition. And it might be on both the national team front and the club front. And that may actually even just straight up affect revenue. So you might have stronger incentive now than you did way back.
I think we're just going to have to wait and see. Also, they're going to have to figure out, as you alluded to, their fan troubles, which, granted, I want to make sure that I put this in fair context. This isn't a Mexico problem. It's a soccer problem.
Yeah.
This happens in other places in the world far too much, including Europe, Middle East, Asia, whatever have you. But Mexico needs to figure out the problem that it has within Mexico, because I mean, you don't see this happening that much in MLS too much, or in just North America, period, or in the United States, I should say, period.
That might be a matter of socioeconomic conditions, honestly.
That probably is a point that should be considered in there. But if you're going to be trying to bring in exports, depending on where you're taking them from, that might be something that you're going to want to make sure that you have addressed. Also, you're going to want to address that before the World Cup starts in 4 years, because you're going to have a problem if you haven't gotten rid of that, or at least, I should say, control it.
Yeah. Okay. We've discussed a lot of stuff. Should we end the podcast now?
I think we're at a good point.
This is also going to be extremely long and quite a lot of editing, but